Hi everybody. So hopefully I'll have a few more joining us. So we're hoping to have another 6 or 7 people, but I appreciate it at the moment things are changing. So yeah, you make plans in the diary and they might change. But great to have you join us. Is Jodie joining at all today?
Sorry, yeah, she's just coming along. We just got through another meeting that was going on a bit. So.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I know Amy at Stillings had to give apologies. She was saying there's a bit manic at the moment.
Yeah.
So we can mix that and introduce the session. So I met a couple of people before. I hadn't met Olivia, so it's great for Olivia to join. So it's a quick introduction. I'm Matt. I'm the EAUC Scotland Programme Manager. So we're funded by Scottish Funding Council to deliver sustainability actions with colleges and universities in Scotland. Just for Olivia's benefit, so we'd set up a student leaders sort of support group in August, which was really good to see. I think it's about 18 different institutions represented there. And as a follow-up session for those that are interested, we've sort of dedicated this session for those institutions that want to look at mapping their student union or student associations greenhouse gas emissions footprint and what kind of actions you can do to reduce that, and looking at offsets as well in case you want to look at setting a carbon neutral standard, for example. So Jill will be going through a bit of start about the different scopes. What does that mean? And this will also help when you're engaging with your university or college as well when they're talking about this, about their own footprint, so you know what to expect. And then I'll touch on again how we can reduce those, and then back to Jill for a bit on the offsetting. Just as a little exercise gets started, it'd be great if you could all just introduce each other. And just one thing you're working on at the moment, maybe sustainability related. Have you been engaging recently with your university or college onto sustainability? What sort of conversations are happening? So from my end start, I'll say I had a really good meeting with the College Development Network this week. So we looked at the single-use plastics consultation. So we're going to be putting in a consultation response on behalf of the sector, championing, saying, yep, we support Zero Waste Scotland and the Scottish Government's initiative to basically restrict single-use plastics. So really excited about that piece of work. I'll hand over to Jill.
Hi everyone, I'm the Carbon and Estates Project Officer at EAUC Scotland. I have been running topic support network events recently, and also I'm doing work to support institutions with their public bodies climate change duties submissions for this year, because the deadlines end in November.
And then I hand over to Scott.
Hi guys, I'm Scott. I'm the Communications and Networks Officer at EAUC. So I've been the one who sends you the emails about these events and tags you on Twitter. Main thing I'm working on currently is the EAUC Scotland conference, which should launch next week and be open for booking. I'll pass on to Jodie.
Hi everyone, so I'm Jodie. I'm the Student Development Coordinator at Strathclyde Students' Union. So I'm with Rue. Rue's our Vice President, so I'm Rue's Staff Support Lead. And something that I'm doing kind of from a staff point of view at the moment is I'm looking at mapping the activities that the union does against the Sustainable Development Goals. So yeah, and Rue can tell you a bit more about the campaign type work.
Sure, shall I go? Hi, I'm Rue, Vice President of Community at Strath. Well, a couple of things that we've been working on sustainability related. The university have just set up a Centre for Sustainable Development, which is sort of linking in all the various strands of sustainable development related things. And I've been involved in the delivery group for that and ongoing stuff for that as well, which is quite exciting. Also working, just setting up an action group, which is a new sort of student group type thing we've got on various issues, but one on the climate emergency. So it'll sort of enable some like student-led campaigning on that. So that's two of the big things we're working on at the moment.
It's really, really exciting here, and really great launch on the Institute. I know myself and Scott were on that, looking at and hearing the presentations, really good. So really excited to see what comes from that. And just a quick question, Jodie, what's in the cage behind you? I'm curious.
I never usually actually Zoom from here, but Rue and I have actually just come for another meeting. This is my tortoise. I don't know if she's, yeah, she's there. Ruth's here just hanging out there.
Just chilling. I like that.
I've got my dog next to me as well, so it's all full of animals. This house full of animals.
Brilliant. Love it.
Got me out.
Sorry, did you say me? I didn't.
Yeah, there we go.
I didn't hear that. Hi, so I'm Claire, also from the EAUC, but I'm from the UK head office down in Cheltenham. I'm the engagement officer, and one of my roles is to look after our communities of practice, which are the England, Wales, and Northern Ireland equivalent of your TSNs. And I'll be honest, I've come here to steal some ideas.
Very honest. No, it'd be good. Good to have you join us. And then can we go up to Olivia, if that's okay.
Hiya, so I'm the Students' Union Environment Officer for the Royal Vet College in London. So I'm not from a Scottish uni, but Matt invited me along today because we're writing some environmental policy at the moment, and we were sort of trying to get some ideas on how to improve it. And we're also working towards net zero in scopes 1 and 2 by 2030. So we've got a lot going on trying to write some targets for that at the moment.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, really exciting to see that policy and see how that develops. So yeah, really glad you're able to join us. And then finally, we have Nicholas as well. It's great to have Nicholas join us.
Hi guys, my name is Nicholas. I'm the student president from City Glasgow College. I'm the first candidate with 100% my environmental manifesto. Some of the work that I've done so far is to create a society called Down to Earth for students, which is getting great engagement. Then we have a project team. The first campaign we're running is Unplug. The reason is because more than 90% of the college carbon emissions come from electricity. And it's also a topic that connects with the senior managers. So the fundamental of Unplug is a student pledge to save energy. And with this student pledge, I want as many students and staff to sign this pledge so I can prove their environmental concerns, because sometimes decisions are taken depending the concerns of the students. So I want to showcase that and represent that. We are giving for free hot water bottles to reduce heat consumption at home in Christmas. And and we have a Watson that will be all environmental initiatives like cycling, composting workshops, and we have the 12 podcasts from Greta Thunberg. This is something super cool, by the way, because the 1st of November will be a year from now to the COP26. The COP26 is like 13 days, and the podcasts from Greta Thunberg are also 12 podcasts. So one of the Society for Environment is a freaky from Greta, and we split the podcast of 5 minutes episodes, and we're gonna have quizzes. So yeah.
So that sounds great. Lots happening. And I think as well the hot water bottle idea is absolutely fantastic. I'm sure lots of people will appreciate that. I mean, I've had mine out the last couple of nights, I've got to admit. When it gets down, yeah, really lots happening. That's really good to hear. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to hand over to Jill. I'll start sharing the screen. We'll crack on, but it's quite nice to have a small group. So if you have any questions, do just chip in at any point, pop in the chat box, and yeah, just have a really good open discussion. So I'll hand over to Jill.
Thanks, Matt. Can you flip on a couple of slides, please? Super, thanks so much. So I am going to run through how to go about quantifying the greenhouse gas emissions associated with your students' union or association. Please jump in at any point if you've got any questions at all. I've tried to keep it quite simple, yeah, so that we can be really inclusive. But yeah, I'm happy to go into further detail if you've got any questions. So the first step is obviously you need to define your reporting period. For most of you, I imagine that would be the academic year 2019-20. Although a calendar year is also completely fine if that's your preference. Then you have to think about setting your operational reporting boundary. So that's the source of emissions that you're going to include in your inventory. And I'll briefly run through how to collect the data for each of those sources, and then you would pop those in the calculator that we've created that will quantify the emissions for you. This is the greenhouse gas protocol, which is widely recognised as international best practice. It's published by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the World Resources Institute, and it provides reporting requirements and guidance for organisations such as universities and colleges. Next slide, please, Matt. Hi, Jodie, I've just seen your question. Yeah, I've recorded this, so I can just send out, I'll send out the slides, but we'll also share the recording afterwards if that would be interesting, especially because a few people haven't been able to make it. So this illustrates, so the protocol covers the 7 main greenhouse gases. You don't need to worry about this too much, but just to give you some background information. So carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, HFCs, PFCs, SF6 and NF3. The emissions factors in the tools are carbon dioxide equivalent. So that includes, so for example, for natural gas, it includes the CO2, the CH4 and the N2O. That is just one figure. They've all been combined into one. And the protocol breaks down emissions into 3 different scopes. So you've got your scope 1 emissions, which are direct emissions, which the institution has control over, such as fuel combustion in boilers or within any owned vehicles. Then you have scope 2 emissions, which are indirect emissions from the generation of purchased electricity or heat. And then everything else is classed as scope 3. So these are indirect emissions, which are a consequence of the activities of the institution, but which you don't directly control. So this would be sending away to landfill, business travel and commuting. Next slide, please, Matt. So it's best practice to report all of your scope 1 and your 2 emissions and relevant scope 3 emissions where possible. EUC Scotland would recommend as a minimum reporting boundary that you include building energy and fleet vehicles, purchased electricity and heat. And then within scope 3, I think you should be aiming for electricity transmission and distribution. I'll talk about this when we look at data collection. Waste disposal, water supply and treatment, business travel, and then if possible, it'd be great if you included commuting. Next slide, please, Matt. So now I'm going to look at specific data collection methods for the recommended sources of emissions. So for building energy fuel combustion, these are scope 1 emissions. For most of you, I imagine it's going to be natural gas in boiler, your heating systems. The data should be really easily available from your fuel bills and it should be collected in kilowatt hours. Next slide, please, Matt. Then for electricity, so these are scope 2, like I mentioned. It's actually split into 2 different sources. So you've got your the emissions associated with generating the electricity that you consume, which is the scope 2. Then you also have the emissions associated with the transmission and distribution losses associated with that electricity that you've consumed. So it's the same factor. Again, should be available from your electricity bill in kilowatt hours. You just enter it into the tool twice. There's 2 separate factors. The main one is the bulk of the emissions, and then there's a small additional source associated with the T&D losses. In terms of electricity, it's also important to note that any electricity that you have sourced from a green tariff cannot unfortunately be reported as zero emissions due to double counting. That's because those emissions have already been included when the government has calculated the average grid emissions factor. So if the user counts them as zero, then that's a double counting. So the only way you can get zero emissions from electricity is if you generate them on the estate with your own renewables, because then they would be considered additional and not part of that grid, obviously. Next slide, please, Matt. Next, for fleet vehicles, if any of the institutions, the SUs or SAs, own vehicles, then this is scope 1 emission. The best quality of data is litres of fuel. And that data should be available from fuel receipts or service records. Now, so in the calculator, I've tried to keep it super simple. So I haven't given choices of units, and I've kept it as litres, but we could change that and have it different types of vehicles and distance, because that might be easier to use. So yeah, as you're working through it, you can just let me know if there's any changes that you would like, and I'm happy to make those. Next slide, please, Matt. So for waste, these are scope 3. We're looking at emissions associated with landfill, incineration, recycling, and composting. You need to know the weight of material sent to each destination, and that data is hopefully available for waste contractors. If not, another option is to do a survey, so look at the waste that you're generating over a week or a month, and then extrapolate that up to cover your annual reporting period, which sometimes smaller organizations need to do because the waste contractors are not, it might be that your waste is joined in with the university's waste and it's not possible to separate it out. Next slide, please, Matt. Thanks. So water supply and treatment, scope 3 emissions. I mentioned earlier, I think, that there's 2 separate categories here, so you need to make sure to enter both in the calculator. What you need to know is the volume of water consumed in cubic meters you get from the supplier, and if the volume of treated water is not available, you can estimate this to be 95% of the supply volume. Again, if it's not possible to get the water consumption from the supplier, we could look at methods of estimating. I'm not aware of any averages, but we could look at similar sized institutions and see what their consumption is based on either number of staff or floor area of premises. There's lots of different options for that, and they're quite a small source of emissions in the grand scheme of your total, so it's not something to be too concerned about if the data is not easily available. Next slide, please, Matt. So business travel, these can be more significant emissions. They're scope 3 from air, road, and rail travel. What you need to collect is the distance travelled by each mode of transport in kilometres or passenger kilometres if it's a mass transit. The data is available from travel booking systems or expenses. I appreciate it can be quite time consuming to pull it together. Everyone's in the same boat with that. For air travel, ideally it should be broken down by domestic, short haul and long haul travel, and that's because there's more fuel consumed during landing and takeoff cycles. So a shorter flight has a higher emissions per passenger kilometre. And then for road travel, this should be broken down by vehicle type. Next slide, please, Matt. Last one. For commuting, this is a scope 3 emission. It's not essential that you include it, but I think it's best practice if you're able to. So it's just looking at staff travel between home and work. Best source of data is an annual travel survey. You would be looking at collecting distance travelled, number of days that the staff's in the office, transport type used, number of days worked per year. Survey data can obviously be extrapolated up from a representative sample. It doesn't have to be a huge sample. A lot of people that I've worked with, they're only getting like 10% response rate to their surveys, and that's fine because it's a scope 3 emission, so it's just to give you a sense of the scale of it relative to your other sources, and also a change in direction if you're managing to influence it through reductions that Matt's going to speak about next. And also it's not essential to do a survey every year. You could use previous, some institutions do one every second year, and they just extrapolate the data with updated staff numbers for the reporting periods. So there's lots of options there. And also I appreciate that with COVID, commuting emissions have obviously reduced massively. So yeah, that it's quite interesting. It'll be quite interesting to see how that impact continues as we move towards more people returning to campus. So that was everything that I had to say about sort of methodology and data collection. Does anyone have any questions? Do you think it's going to be relatively easy for you to collect this information? Do you know who to contact? Do you think there's any specific challenges that you'd like to discuss, or are there any sources that you would like for us to add to the calculator? Nicholas?
Yeah, so something I kind of feel is kind of the elephant in the room when I go to committees in the like financing and things like that. What about the pensions schemes? what companies with which banks are we managing our finance, all this kind of stuff. Now, for example, me that I'm in the board of management, I asked to have with the secretary this Friday a meeting, and I want to find out that, but I don't know how to approach this issue. I don't know how to,
Yeah. So investments and endowments, that would be, they are a source of Scope 3 emissions. Very few institutions are including them at the moment. I think that, am I right in thinking that Edinburgh is looking at including them? Nobody reports them in their public bodies at the moment, but there are methods to look at including them. But yeah, that's quite advanced.
Yeah.
I can look out some information on that and send it through to you. Would you be interested?
Yeah, I can also update you in the next event. You know, if you guys want to know, you might find it with the secretary. I think he's a nice guy, and I'm gonna be deeply honest with him. Like, I don't know how to approach this issue, but I really want to handle it. I want to find out what's going on with investments in fossil fuel industry, and the pension. Where is our money going? Is it to destroy our future and our planet, or is it to, you know? Yeah.
And just coming on that, Nicholas, a really interesting point. And I don't know, you know, opening it up, when I was at Stirling, we did do a banking review for the union itself. So we did look at, well, you know, who are we currently with? Who could we go with? Is that something in you know, opening up Strathclyde and Napier and yourselves, is that something the unions and associations are looking at themselves?
Pensions are a tricky subject. Matt? No, so we looked at it last year because last year they looked at changing our pensions basically, but they didn't, which is good. But when we were discussing changing our pensions, when we were kind of looking at maybe alternative providers and stuff, there was actually a big push from staff to look at ethical pension. To have, so we asked that whatever pension provider we were looking at going to, we could be provided with like portfolios. So a lot of pensions actually, I think most pensions do actually, they do provide portfolios where you can choose to invest ethically. So I don't know about my current pension. We're actually still with, I think we're still with a really old pension scheme. I can't remember who we're actually with. I can't remember, but the staff at the union are with the same pension scheme that we could have always been with. But if we do change our pension, and last year there were discussions around that, that was kind of the only time it's ever really been raised, because we were looking at different portfolios. So that's what's happened at Strathclyde. But again, we are on quite a good pension, but it's a very old one. So yeah, so it's one of those ones. It might change in the next couple of years. It's not been discussed again. It was a big thing last year, but I think if we were to change, there would definitely be a push on going towards going with a sustainable pension provider, or even just having that option. I think it was a big thing. Was it people, if we were going to be changing providers, could we choose an ethical portfolio essentially?
I mean, one potential, another way to have that conversation as well is to look at day-to-day banking. So not necessarily pensions, but where does the union or association have its current account? So that doesn't link as a personal thing. I think that's quite a nice way to open up the topic. So we looked at Triodos and cooperative as alternatives as well. We did a bit of a scoping. So we thought, okay, we're kind of locked in at the moment, but in I think it was after a year, we've kind of gone through the process and audited all these other companies and said, actually, I think we said at the time Co-op was probably the best, because Triodos didn't allow charities of a certain size access to certain services at that point. But it says when we come to the next review, when we can change, it's going to be Co-op, for example, and shifting away from, I can't remember who it was, I think it was NatWest previously. So that could be a way that unions and associations broach that subject more and also have an immediate impact. So there is various. So I did ask NUS if they could provide some support on that. So they were quite keen. So I don't know if that's been followed up, but that could be something. Olivia and Ankit, have you had anything on banking, looking at sustainable banking in the Union Association?
Sorry, I have no clue about that. I'm already built on a lot of other projects. But yes, one of the projects for transportation I was working was the bike hire scheme, and I'm pushing university, to provide some bikes to the students, just to, when they come up for the semester, especially transition students who just come here for short while, postgraduate students who just come here for just for 1 year, and then even if they are far from Edinburgh, like they are from North Scotland or they're from England, they're not going to bring their bicycle. It will help them, and that will be a step from university as well. But they are, because they do a lot of chit chat, like, oh yeah, we are committed to our 2030, carbon neutrality and all that. But what's the action plan? So
I think it's a really good point. I think that's where unions and associations can be leaders and show action, sometimes on a smaller scale, but it prompts the change on a wider scale. So that's, yeah, really good. Olivia, is this something, looking at banking, is that something that could be included in your policy that you're drafting up?
I actually am not sure. I'd have to speak to someone. I've only been in post as environment officer for like a couple of months. So a lot of the net zero work last year was done by the previous officer, and then it all kind of just got thrown onto me. And I've got exams coming up, so it's a bit of a challenging time at the minute. But I can definitely speak to some people and see what, I know who we're with for banking, I think, but see what their sustainability is like and how that fits in with our targets.
Yeah, Jodie?
So I actually just had something to add on to the back of this, and I think it's probably worthwhile saying that I think if you're looking at moving towards a sustainable pension portfolio, the most important thing is to make sure that like you have staff on board, because people always, normally people want to invest in a sustainable portfolio, and it's worthwhile looking to see if your current pension provider will provide that. But it's quite difficult because we are all in the third sector. So it's always very difficult to discuss changing people's pensions when it might actually make a huge impact on them. So, it really depends. Like if it's a similar pension provider, then yeah, but there's no point in lying and saying that people, most people who are working in the third sector probably aren't going to want to give up a significant amount of their retirement fund for an ethical investment. It's a horrible thing to say. Like, even I'm a green person, I'm very like a sustainable person, don't get me wrong, but it's very difficult. So I think if you're looking at moving pension providers, trying to make sure that it's a similar provider and that people aren't going to lose out, because obviously people's retirement funds are really important to them, especially people who are approaching retirement as well. It can be quite daunting talking about changing pensions. So that's probably just another bit of advice I'd maybe put on the back of that.
No, really good and really valid. Yeah, we see I've done a little bit of campaigning looking at public sector pensions across, Stirling Council, for example, and it is recognising all these issues you just highlighted. It's a difficult one, and I think it's very emotive, and rightly so. So lots to consider. I'm just downloaded the calculator that Jill created. So I don't know, Jill, if you want to maybe talk through a little bit about how you can plug some of the things you talked about into the calculator. I know I'm putting you on the spot a bit here.
Sorry. Yeah, so it's broken down by scope, just like I mentioned. And so this column here, B, you just type in your data here. So if you've got your kilowatt hours of gas, if your building is heated by gas, you pop it in there, and it will calculate it here. And pull it through, so you get subtotals for your different scopes, and then a total at the end. These are the vehicles that I was talking about. So at the minute, I've got it for litres. We could change it. I could pop it distance, but then we'd have to do different. It would make it. The reason I've kept it as litres is just to make it really simple. Because if we start looking at distance, then we'd have to put in lots of different types of vehicles. Matt said that sometimes institutions own minibuses. I don't know what other vehicles you typically have, so we'd have to make sure that we had relevant options for all of those. It's actually interesting. So when I developed this, the Scottish Government tool that all the public bodies use was a platform, but this year they've actually developed a spreadsheet that you guys could use. But it's quite complex. So you have to go through and select all the relevant emission sources rather than. So there's different options, but I'm happy to make changes to this to make it as usable as possible for you. So then there's the grid electricity for under scope 2 there. Again, I haven't put any district heating options in there because I don't know if anyone needs them, but if they do, that we can add that in. That's the transmission and distribution for the electricity, water and supply and treatment, the different emissions factors there. For waste, we've got a landfill option. We've got the incineration and the recycling is actually the same factor, because basically incineration is treated like recycling in that you only look at the transportation to the point of it becoming a material for a new supply chain. So I've just kept them as the same thing. I don't know if that's confusing or not. But yeah, happy to have some feedback on that. Oh, and the waste factors are split out. So you've got your sort of commercial, industrial, office type waste, but then also food and drink waste, which obviously when that's going to landfill, food and drink waste, there's much higher emissions associated with that because there's more organic matter there. And I know obviously within the unions you potentially do have quite a lot of food waste. Here's the business travel options that I spoke about. Again, remember so I've given you averages. I've just gone for an average car factor, so you don't need to worry about the fuel type or the size of the vehicle. Just again, because I thought that would be more accessible. We've got for the flights again broken down by the length of the flight, and then commuting. I've just gone for average car, rail, and bus as options, but also happy to add anything that you think would be useful.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Just say that's readily available for any union association to use. So do make use of that. It's on the website, and if you can't find it, just let me know, and then we can send that through. I've always got a question from Jody. So for the commuting, that would be your staff.
Yeah, it's just your staff, not the students. So the university or the college themselves should be including student travel, but as an organization, the union shouldn't be doing that. Have you all seen, so I think last time I sort of shared the link, so you can access your institution's reporting from the Sustainable Scotland Network. I can send that link around with the resources today so you can see. So for example, I think that Strathclyde do include student commuting.
Do you mean the university?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the university
seen that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I wasn't sure about Students' Union because we actually we've not done it before. Like I know about carbon calculators and stuff, but I don't think we've ever done it. And we will be moving building though, so it might be quite a good opportunity for us to start doing it more integrated with the university. But I just wondered whether we would use student data, because it'd be quite hard because most students come into university to go to university as opposed to the union, so I wasn't sure, but that's fine.
No, I think you should just be looking at your staff and not the students.
Yeah, so Jodie, when we did this Stirling as a first step, we just did commuting for full-time staff. So we got 100% response rate. And then it was a bit more difficult because students came and went as the semester went for most of the bar work, for example, which was a little bit more difficult. So I think it was 20 full-time staff versus up to 100, 120 over one academic year. So we kind of just went with the full-time staff with a view to then get a representative sample of the part-time staff later as a first point. But it was a really good exercise, and it did show anyone driving from Edinburgh to Stirling, which a couple did. They changed their travel habits after it because they could see their difference compared to everyone else. So that was interesting.
I see your question, Olivia. I think that it would include voluntary members of staff at the SU. But obviously it is up to you, because you choose to set the boundary, so you can decide not to, but I would think that it makes sense to include everybody who's traveling in for work.
Oh, go on, sorry.
I was just saying thank you.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, pop them in the chat box. I'll continue with the presentation, but yeah, hopefully Joe will be able to pick those up as well. We've got some time at the end, hopefully. Right, see if I get the right one. Here we go. So looking at ways to reduce them, this is a hypothetical situation, but I think Stirling, when we mapped these out, it was about 135 tons a year. is what we were going at. So seeing how it reduces over time would be interesting. So just kind of going through the scopes that Joe mentioned. So looking at heating, it's quite difficult, I think, for lots of unions. You might not necessarily have your own heating system unless you've got a number of buildings which are isolated. So maybe University of Edinburgh, for example, TVA House might have its own heating system. But our experience at Stirling, and I imagine in other places, RGU, for example, you're part of the wider building. So we essentially just got the heating provided by the university. So we got our factor measurement. We took them in our floor area and took the university's data. But things that we took, or actions we undertook to try and reduce it, was looking at, is our union or students association heated during the night? Is it heated during Christmas periods, for example, or essentially programming? So having a discussion with your facilities managers. We actually found in Stirling that we were the heat dump. So when there was excess heat in the system, they actually shoved it into the union. So our place was actually roasting at times. So that was interesting. It created some good talks. And are there areas heated when they're not in use? And when in use, could the temperature be reduced? So as I say, there's lots of campaigns saying if you can reduce your central heating at home 1 or 2 degrees, you save a lot of money, but also has a really big impact on emissions. And then looking at fleet vehicles, seeing if you can create systems. So usually you have to submit receipts or evidence for when you're booking a journey. You have to log it in finance, for example. Can you add another couple of lines to that form saying, what is the reason for that trip? And you can also add in some more data. So we at Stirling, we took the business travel form and basically said, what mode of travel are you taking? You have to put in the mileage. If it's, for example, a train journey, we added the link to where people can calculate, right, we're going down to London, what's the mileage? And it really helps me at the end of the day when I had to plug all these things into the spreadsheet to come out with a carbon figure. So those sorts of processes can be really helpful. And if you are looking, you do have fleet vehicles and you are renew them, looking for hybrid, particularly if you're just going between short sites, because you could do it purely on electric charge, or ideally also full electric vehicles as well. So touching on the reducing the central heating, I don't know how your Dutch is, but this is the Warme Troendag, which is the warm jumper day in the Netherlands, which is February 15th every year. And it coincides with the Kyoto Protocol, and that was signed back in 1990s. And what's really nice, so it says, my Dutch is very basic, but if everyone in the Netherlands reduced their heating by 1 degree a day in a year, so just 1 day, collectively the Netherlands would save €2 million, and it's 6,300 tons of CO2 equivalent saved. If they reduced it by 1 degree for the entire heating season, that would be 1 million tons of CO2 saved and €350 million. And lots of universities get behind this. So this is, I just took this from University of Leiden in the northern Netherlands. So they reduced their heating down to 16 degrees, might be a bit chilly that, but usually it's like 17, 18 degrees. And they just say, we're going to be doing this next week, remember your jumper. And that's what it looks like. So it looks actually quite a lot of fun, minus the guy on the right, he does look like a bit chilly. But people really get behind it. And, I studied in the Netherlands for a couple of years, and you also have clothes swap days, knitting workshops. It's quite a good day to kind of talk about these things. So this could be something that your union tries setting up on campus, just 1 day to highlight these issues. Because often we hold the green sustainability weeks in the first semester, and then there's nothing that second semester. So this could be something. Looking at scope 2, so that's all about electricity use predominantly. So you can complete a lighting audit to see if you can make any quick wins. So often if you've still got non-LED lighting, for example, switching those to LEDs can be a really good way of reducing electricity use, but also making a good financial saving. So you can ask help for that from facilities managers. So I got some assistance from the university, and we just created an Excel spreadsheet, and that was in place for over 10 years. And gradually we got through and made improvements. Alongside that, looking at equipment use, is equipment left on when it's not needed, particularly during out of office hours? So when everyone leaves at 5 p.m, although usually it's a little later, as everyone's computer still left on, for example, are we shutting them down? Printers, if Stirling, we had a 2-week shutdown every summer. At that point, we could shut down essentially all the printers. It's worth doing at that point. Looking at commercial services, is the equipment efficient, both in terms of electricity for scope 2, but we'll touch on scope 3 about water use as well. And similarly, are things switched on, left on? Dishwashers, for example, overnight, can you switch those off? And again, when you're looking to upgrade equipment, ensure it's resource efficient from the outset. So I've got an example lighting audit that we did at Stirling. Hopefully I've got the wrong one there. Too many Excel spreadsheets up. No, it's not liking it. Right, where's that one? There we go. So essentially we created this spreadsheet which maps all the different rooms in the union, and then it has the type of lighting that was in each room, the quantity and the number of lights fitting, and we have, importantly, the wattage as well. And then what we could work out is, with this little formula, is when you switch the lights on in that room, how much electricity is it using? So essentially that's 2 lights fitting per fitting times 6, we've got 12 times 28. And then you times it by a factor of 1.1 because there's a little bit extra energy than actually just the light bulbs, and divided by 1,000 to get a kilowatt hours. So if you switch on my old office, it would be 369 watts essentially. The next step that we took was trying to figure out how long, on average, how long were we using those light bulbs, for example. So on average 40 hours a week for 40 weeks a year, because we've also got the summer months when it's lighter and we're not using them as much. So they're probably again used about 1,600 times, 1,600 hours a year. And if you times that by your circuit power, you get your electricity use for the year. So 591 kilowatt hours. And we did this for all the areas of the union. It's probably an exercise that probably took about 4 hours. So it's not too bad, but thankfully, for me, it was done 10 years ago. And then I just kept updating it. So these are the latest figures, but what we kind of found was you can really target areas. So for example, it was less impactful to upgrade our area, despite we might have had poor quality lighting, compared to, let's say, the Robbins kitchen. So that's our commercial services, because they were using that area for 70 hours a week and double the number of hours we had. So if we installed new equipment there, it had a huge saving. So these are the updated figures, but we essentially, I think it was a 60% reduction in lighting that we achieved, because we did this audit and we put the figures in. So we found that really useful. Just on that as well, we also found the university was also installing lighting across its campus. And by doing this exercise, they actually realized it's more advantageous for them as well to install it in the union, because they would have a bigger grid saving than actually in some of the other parts of their campus, because they'd forgotten about the union for about 15 years. So they were like, wow, we can actually make a huge saving here. So we got, £2,000 worth of free lighting, and the union kitchen was saving probably about £300 a year on electricity expenses as well as reducing our carbon footprint. So that was really beneficial. And then alongside that, looking at wider campaigns, so you can tie in what you're doing in the union to wider behavior change as well. So we ran an Interhall energy competition. I know other universities do these, and we found it really successful. So in the first year we ran this, Polwarth, which is a accommodation block, reduced their electricity use by 20% over an entire year. And collectively, the university saved about £5,000. So we gave the winning hall £500 each semester, and the university had essentially £4,000 saving. But that could be, depending on the relationship with the university or college, you could say actually all that money could go into sustainability projects, or that could help fund sustainability works in the union. So if we had an extra couple of £1,000, we could upgrade the dishwasher, for example. And it just kind of reinforces that positive behavior as well. Finally, looking at scope 3, so looking at water use, bathroom facilities. So that's the biggest kind of source of water use on most campuses, particularly student unions. And waterless urinals is probably one of the biggest impacts you can make, as well as things like push taps. So I've just got a quote from one of the sector staff, used to work at Perth College, and he's actually put this in an email last month. It's on a different chat. He said, when he installed them where he worked 20 years ago, they paid for the installation costs within 1 year based on the savings of 25 to 33% in water consumption. So we did the same exercise in Stirling Students' Union in 2010, And within a year, we'd cut our water use by 40%, and they paid for themselves. So this can be a really quick way of making an impact both on scope 3 emissions, but also wider resource use as well as financial saving. And again, catering equipment, looking at dishwasher efficiency. Then more widely looking at business travel, do you have a union policy on supporting business transport over private car use or flying? So a couple of quite a few organisations now are starting to ban in UK flying, for example. So Zero Waste Scotland is a great example where they've actually said we're not going to fly anywhere in the UK unless you have to go to the islands, I think. But equally, they'll get the train as far as Brussels and Paris because they recognise the impact of flying. Does your union or college association, do they support extra mileage payment for car sharing? So a good practice, for example, is you pay 42 pence a mile for private car use, but can you increase that to 50 pence if they're car sharing, for example? That would also save your sports union money because they don't have to pay out that 40 pence charge twice, but as well as supporting good practice. Also, is there a policy for paying for cycling mileage? So that's often at 20p a mile. And actually, promoting people to accept that. I think sometimes there's a bit of resistance from people who do cycle. I've had it previously. I've spoken with others who enjoy the cycling part, so they feel a bit guilty charging 20 pence a mile to employers. But that's something that you can support, and also cycle to work schemes. Finally, looking more widely at resource use, and it's a bit harder to account for this in the carbon emissions calculating. But for example, printing audit can be really good. So it'd be great to hear if when you print, do you have your own personal code when you're printing? Does that assign to your department within your union or association? So we did this exercise at Stirling, and we reduced our printing by 47%, I think, and that saved just over £2,000. We found actually it was just a couple of departments that were doing predominantly the most of the colour printing. So that was our chief exec. She was very red-faced when we came out with that, but then she massively reduced it. Finance as well, because they had to use a lot of spreadsheets and comparing. So actually what we did was we got them multiple screens and their printing use plummeted. And then we looked at digitizing processes. And yeah, internal prizes, because often, I think we all hear about the don't print so much. So I offered just a coffee to the best 2 places. And unfortunately it meant that I did have to buy my boss a coffee, but she did a great job. Yeah, so yeah, you can have big impacts there. And then just more widely, if you have any thoughts or you're not sure what to do, just do get in touch. Also, we can help you link up with your sustainability lead. So looking at lighting audits, for example, or how you map or get the data for different parts of your carbon footprints, we can support that. Also, I really want to flag up Zero Waste Scotland. They have the small medium enterprise interest-free loans and scoping studies. There's funding support for unions and associations because they actually fit in that category. So universities and colleges can't get it, but unions and associations can. I really recommend that because they'll actually send someone out to do a scoping study, which is a really good in-depth report of saying actually what energy saving measures can you install based on your facilities. So it's really bespoke, and look at the financial savings and the argument for it. So you don't have to take them up, but it's a really good scoping study and resource there. And it's first come, first serve. So when the funding runs out, it's gone. So really recommend that you take the opportunity to look at those. I'll just stop sharing there a sec and pause. Does anyone have any questions on that or any thoughts? Is there anything that you could take back and use in your union association?
I love that. I did a lot of screenshots. I said down in the chat. I copied the idea of reducing the heating for a couple of days. I think that's brilliant. And yeah, let's get cold, but let's be environmentalists. And remember, when you this is for a better future. I think it's fun. I think it's good. And then the urinals was very interesting. I was going to pop a message in the chat that I really need to go to a committee, but it was a very, very nice learning experience. I can't wait for the next event.
No, that's great news. So we'll have the recording as well. So the last bit, we'll send that through so you can catch up at the end. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the email reminder of the event that was starting. That really helped me.
That's good. That was good to know. Cheers. Okay. So yeah, if you have anything, I'll just pop it in the chat box now. I'll hand over back to Jill, who will touch on the end for the look at quickly on offsetting.
Hi. So, if your institution is the student union or the student association is thinking about setting a net zero target, then you are going to have to start thinking about offsetting as an option. Now, my colleague Scott, who's on the line, I think, prepared this 2 minute animated video, that's got a little background about offsetting, so that would be quite interesting to watch. And then we can have a little chat afterwards if you've got any questions. Do you want to start it, Matt?
Our topic for this briefing is what is carbon offsetting? Carbon offsetting is a commonly used term that means an action or activity that compensates for the emission of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Offsets are often thought of as tree planting. This actually makes up a minority of offset projects. Preventing deforestation, renewable energy projects, and gas capture and storage are more common types. Offsets can either be the reduction of emissions, for example, replacing fossil fuel power with renewables, or they can increase the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. For example, planting more trees to absorb carbon dioxide. Offsets can be further split into ex post and ex ante. Ex post offsets are ones that have already absorbed carbon dioxide. For example, if you purchase forestry offsets for a forest that was already fully grown. Ex ante offsets are before absorption has happened. For example, paying for the forest to be planted in the first place. Offsets are also commonly used in the context of net zero targets. Net zero is when the emissions that you produce and the emissions that you're responsible for offsetting are equal. This is not really zero, as you still cause the emissions and no offset can reduce the impact of emissions to true zero. No offset can ever be equal to a reduction. If you are wanting to offset, it's important to choose high quality offsets. Our attached briefing guide has a full list of criteria, but the most important thing is to choose an offset that's been independently certified. This means that someone has inspected the offset program and that the provider can prove they're having the impact that they claim. Regardless of the offset you choose, reductions are the priority and are the most important thing you can do. High quality offsets can have a role with what cannot be reduced any further, but should only be used as a last resort. We hope this video was useful. Our next briefing will be on the topic of divestment.
Can you pop just to the next slide, Matt? Thanks so much. So as Scott beautifully explained there, one of the really important things that you need to look for if you're thinking about purchasing offsets is that it's been verified. So there's a robust audit trail. Also, you need to think about additionality, and so that is whether the carbon savings would have happened regardless of the offset money. And permanence is important so that the savings are sustained over time, especially with forestry projects. And also double counting, which we spoke about before with the green electricity. So it's important to be sure that the reductions have only been claimed once. So current prices range from £6 to £15 per tonne of carbon dioxide, but obviously that may rise in the future. International projects tend to be cheaper and have better social benefits. If you wanted to, I sort of pulled out some that have links to Scottish institutions, but if you were interested to look, so Plan Vivo, I think is supported by some academics at the University of Edinburgh, and the Association for Coastal Ecosystem Services is supported, that's a marine offset programme, and it's supported by academics at Edinburgh Napier University. And then some interesting UK projects are the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, and links to those will be circulated for the slides after the meeting. And if you wanted to look into it further, there's a great carbon offset guide that is linked to there. Offsets are quite contentious, but so that's why it's important to look for high quality verified offsets if you want to use them. and yeah, realistically, they are probably going to be part of lots of people's net zero strategies and plans. Does anyone have any questions about offsetting? Is it something that you've considered, or is it too early for that? Because Olivia, you mentioned that you are have planned to be net zero by 2030 for your scope 1 and 2 emissions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very early on at the moment in all the plans for that, so I think we've got a lot of work to do first, but I had thought about offsetting, so I think I need to speak to the SU about what money they would have available, but hopefully we'd be able to save some money with some of the reductions in emissions anyway that could then be spent on the offsetting. So definitely have to speak to some of the people that are involved in finances, but obviously with COVID, the budgets are quite stretched at the moment as it is, I think.
And Kit?
Hi, Jill, I was just wondering if you can share some details or any links that we can take it to our management or to university leadership team. I have raised this point a few times, and the last week was for the World Climate Week, something like that, right? So where I raised this to principal and let's, work out together, plant some trees around and something, but they didn't show much interest. So they said that we're not saying no, but it's not in our top priorities. But I'm sure, for 2030, carbon neutrality and all this, there's a lot of talks going on, but to getting them an action plan, anything we can specific say that, okay, this is the scheme, we can support that, like, offsetting specifically.
So at the moment, we are waiting for some guidance from the Scottish Government of what they're going to expect from public bodies in terms of offsetting. They've hinted that there's going to be a strong preference for the offsets to be happening within Scotland as opposed to international projects. And when we hear from them, we'll share that widely with the network, because I think that will be useful for engaging senior management teams. But so I understand, so Jamie, who is the sustainability manager at Edinburgh Napier, I understand that they are looking at the marine project, or certainly the academics at Napier are working on that, and that's one of the options that they're considering. And interestingly, Matt and I met with someone who was at Clyde Carbon Forest, who are looking at reforestation projects, offsetting projects, and are interested in working with institutions. So it's certainly something that's on the radar and people are beginning to think about. But the earliest targets are 2030. At the point at which they'd have to be thinking about offset. So it's most of the focus is on mitigation at the moment, as opposed to investing in sequestration projects, for example.
Yeah, just on top of that, and Kit, so we had an email as well, actually, there recently from Anita Olivier, so Executive Manager of Strategy at Napier. I don't know if you've met Anita, but Anita's really keen. She joined our leadership lab in January, really keen she's really pushing the net zero to be more stringent and looking at offsetting. So if you're not getting traction with the principal, I definitely recommend reaching out to Anita, because she'd be more than happy, I'm sure, to work with you and try and push that, up the agenda a bit further. I mean, it's also important to recognise as well, there's one quite public process. So University of Glasgow being quite public and looking at their plan to get to net zero, and it got absolutely hammered. I think it's fair to say a little bit. And they published that response as well, because they said by 2030 we'll reduce our emissions essentially by 50%, and then we'll offset 50%. And people are saying that is not good enough. And the government's response is, that's not good enough. But equally financially, which might be the way you hook, engage with senior leaders that are going down that route, they were going to pay at a basis of about £7.50 a tonne, over 600,000 a year to offset. Now, the UK government wants offset credits to rise to about £70 a tonne, because that's what the amount of capital we need to make changes. So that £600,000 price tag would suddenly grow to £1.8 million a year, which is a very good argument saying, why are you giving that to someone else when you can invest on your own campus and do those things? So again, it's useful to have maybe a look at a longer term look. And that's something we didn't quite figure out at Stirling a little bit. We got it because it's £7.50 a tonne, but maybe in 5 years we can't afford it. But hopefully our emissions will have gone down and it kind of offsets a bit. So that's another thing to consider as well going forward.
Thank you.
Is there any thoughts or questions, anything? Okay, so just to wrap up, I've got two quick things to highlight, which just come across. I'll share my screen again. Here we go. So yeah, so we've been told about this new network, the Circular Arts Network. So this is specifically to Scotland. So this is a circular economy scheme for the arts sector, which might be of interest if you've got arts courses in college or university, but equally if you've got drama, theatre, society. And essentially it's a big deposit scheme where people can swap, trade, purchase unneeded or second-hand goods. So it's a really good system. So it's just worth flagging up maybe with the student groups and art departments. So there's lots on there. Essentially a Gumtree for arts, which is brilliant. So great to see that happening. The other thing I want to flag up is the single-use plastics consultation that's happening right now. So that's I think it's about another 11 weeks open to get your responses in. But essentially, the government's proposing market restrictions, which is essentially a ban on the 10 most common forms of marine litter in Europe. And this is, single-use plastic cutlery, plates, straws, balloon sticks, polystyrene, for example, and other beverage containers. There are exemptions. So, for example, if someone has a disability and they require a plastic straw, that is allowed. But they're also seeing, how do they create a system that it supports people with disabilities, for example. So really recommend putting your union's view and maybe engaging if you've got a Marine Conservation Society on campus or a green group, as well as, maybe a disabled student staff forum to really, this is really quite a nice, good discussion point to say, how on campus can we support each other, promote the environment, promote equality as well across staff and students. So I've included that in the slides, those links, so you can get those. And EAUC will be putting in a consultation responses ourselves as well. So I think that's if we're running a little bit over, but myself and Jill, not sure, but we'll hang around in case anyone has any additional questions or anything, any other topics, happy to kick around. But thank you very much for joining. We'll send out the presentation, the recording, so you'll have those. And as ever, just get in touch if you have any other questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.